What if I told you that some of the most terrifying stories ever written weren't entirely made up? That the truth is often way more shocking than the story we know? We usually think of novels as products of pure imagination, born in the minds of creative geniuses. But what if the most unforgettable monsters, the most chilling scenarios, and the most heartbreaking tragedies weren't invented at all? What if they were real? Today, we're digging into the real-life events and secret histories that authors confessed were the inspiration for their most famous books. We're pulling back the curtain on fiction to reveal the shocking, sometimes tragic, and always unbelievable true stories hiding underneath. From a real-life sea monster that sent a nation into a panic to a house of horrors that became the blueprint for a cinematic nightmare, these are the moments where reality proved to be more terrifying than anything a writer could invent. So get ready, because the story behind the story is often the most shocking one of all. Section 1. The Real Jaws That Terrorized a Coastline. For most people, the summer of '75 was defined by just two notes. A simple, menacing theme that signaled one thing: you were not safe in the water. Steven Spielberg's film Jaws, based on Peter Benchley's 1974 novel, changed the way an entire generation looked at the ocean. The story of a rogue great white shark hunting swimmers off a fictional island became a cultural phenomenon. It created the perfect monster, a relentless, calculating predator. But this monster wasn't dreamt up in a writer's office. The inspiration was ripped straight from the blood-soaked headlines of 1916. It all started on July 1st, 1916, along the Jersey Shore. It was a sweltering summer, and the beaches were packed. In the resort town of Beach Haven, a 25-year-old named Charles Van Sant went for an evening swim. Suddenly, his screams cut through the surf. A lifeguard and beachgoers rushed to pull him from the water, but it was too late. His leg had been torn apart by a shark, and he bled to death on the floor of the hotel manager's office. Back then, fatal shark attacks in the U.S. were almost unheard of, so the incident was treated as a bizarre, one-off tragedy. 5 days later, and 45 miles north, it happened again. Charles Bruder, a 27-year-old bellhop, was swimming off the coast of Spring Lake when he was attacked. The shark hit him with such force that it severed both of his legs. A lifeboat pulled his mangled body from the water that had turned crimson, but he was already gone. Panic started to spread down the coast. This wasn't just a freak accident anymore. It was a pattern. Beaches started closing, and a sense of dread settled over the seaside towns. But the terror was about to take a turn no one saw coming. The shark, or whatever it was, left the ocean. It swam into Matawan Creek, a brackish inland waterway miles from the open sea. Locals scoffed at the idea. A shark in their quiet creek? No way. That changed on July 12th. An 11-year-old boy, Lester Stillwell, was playing in the creek when he was pulled under. His friends ran for help, and a local man named Watson Stanley bravely dove in to find him. He found Lester's body, but as he tried to bring it to shore, the shark attacked him too. Fisher died from his injuries a short time later. Just 30 minutes later, and half a mile downstream, the same shark attacked 14-year-old Joseph Dunn, but his friends managed to pull him to safety, making him the fifth and final victim. In just 12 days, 4 people were dead and 1 was seriously injured. The events kicked off a massive shark hunt, with fishermen flocking to the area, all wanting to be the one to catch the Jersey man-eater. Eventually, a great white shark was caught in a nearby bay, and human remains were reportedly found inside its stomach. Now, Peter Benchley later clarified his novel wasn't a direct play-by-play of the events, but he admitted that the atmosphere of sheer panic from those 12 days was the core inspiration for his story. He condensed all that real-world terror into one monstrous villain, creating a story that still haunts our waters today. Section 2. The House of Horrors Behind Psycho. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho is a masterpiece of suspense. The film, and the Robert Bloch novel it's based on, gave us one of the most iconic villains in movie history, Norman Bates, the quiet, twitchy motel owner with a very, very close relationship with his mother. The Bates Hotel, that creepy Victorian house on the hill, the shower scene, it's all burned into our minds. But Norman Bates wasn't just a clever character. He was real. Well, sort of. Robert Bloch was inspired by a monster who lived just 35 miles from his home in Wisconsin, a quiet, unassuming farmer named Ed Gein. In November 1957, the small town of Plainfield, Wisconsin was shaken by the disappearance of a hardware store owner, Bernice Worden. Suspicion quickly pointed to Ed Gein, a local recluse who was her last customer. When police went to search Gein's isolated farmhouse, they stumbled into a scene of horror that was worse than any fiction. What they found would not only solve the case, but uncover a secret history of grave robbing, murder, and depravity that would shock the nation. Gein's farmhouse wasn't a home, it was a museum of death. They found Worden's body, but that was just the start. The house was filled with things made from human remains. There were bowls made from skulls, chairs upholstered with human skin, and a lampshade made from a human face. They found a box of preserved female organs, leggings made from the skin of human legs, and masks made from the faces of dead women. Maybe the most disturbing thing of all was a woman's suit, a torso crafted from human skin that Gein had made. He later confessed he wore it around the house, trying to literally become his deceased mother. The investigation revealed Gein had been robbing the graves of recently buried women who he thought looked like his mother. She had been a tyrannical, fanatically religious woman who taught Ed that all women were evil. After she died, Gein's mind completely shattered. He wanted to bring her back, to crawl inside her skin. His grave robbing eventually escalated to murder. While he was only ever convicted for Bernice Worden's murder and was later found legally insane, he also admitted to killing a tavern owner named Mary Hogan years earlier. When Robert Bloch read about Gein, he was hooked on the idea of a seemingly harmless man next door living a secret, monstrous life. The domineering mother, the isolated man, the twisted psychological bond, it all went into creating Norman Bates. Bloch was shocked when he later learned the full details of Gein's life, realizing how closely his fictional creation mirrored the real-life monster living just a short drive away. The world knows Norman Bates, but he was just a shadow of the far more gruesome reality of Ed Gein. It's pretty wild, and honestly a little terrifying to see how reality can be the fuel for our most enduring stories. If you're finding this as fascinating as we are, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We have plenty more secrets behind famous novels to uncover, and you won't want to miss what's next. Section 3. The claustrophobic truth behind Room. Emma Donoghue's 2010 novel, Room, is a story that's both heartbreaking and brilliant, told entirely from the perspective of a 5-year-old boy. Jack doesn't have any idea there's an outside world. The things he sees on TV are just fantasy to him. But we, the readers, quickly realize the horrifying truth. His ma is a prisoner, kidnapped 7 years earlier and held in a soundproof shed by a man they call Old Nick. The novel is a powerful look at survival and the incredible bond between a mother and child in the worst imaginable circumstances. While the story is fiction, its premise was ripped straight from international headlines. Emma Donoghue has openly said the inspiration for Room came from the horrifying case of Elisabeth Fritzl. In April 2008, news broke out of Austria that stunned the world. A 42-year-old woman named Elisabeth Fritzl had been held captive by her own father, Josef Fritzl, for 24 years in a secret windowless cellar under their family home. The nightmare started in 1984, when Josef lured his 18-year-old daughter into the cellar and locked her away. For the next 2.5 decades, he subjected her to horrific abuse and fathered 7 children with her in that prison. One child died soon after birth. Josef raised 3 of the children upstairs with his wife, Rose Marie. He spun this elaborate lie that Elisabeth had run away to join a cult and was leaving the babies on their doorstep. But the other 3 children lived their entire lives in the cellar with their mother. They had never seen sunlight. One of these children was a 5-year-old boy named Felix. And it was the thought of that little boy, Felix, that really sparked something for Emma Donoghue. She became fascinated by the idea of a child for whom a prison was the only home he'd ever known. How would he see the world? What would happen when he was suddenly thrown into the vast, overwhelming reality outside? This question became the heart of her novel. She channeled that idea into her narrator, Jack, creating a voice that is both innocent and incredibly wise. Donoghue made a point to distance her story from the specific details of the Fritzl case. She didn't want to exploit their trauma. In Room, the captor is a stranger, not a father, and the setting is a shed, not a cellar. But the emotional core of the story, the psychological damage of confinement, a mother's fight to create a normal world for her child, and the painful adjustment to freedom is drawn directly from the ordeal of Elizabeth Fritzl and her children. Room is an amazing story about the human spirit, but its inspiration is a chilling reminder of the capacity for human cruelty.
Section 4. The Inner Demons of Stephen King's Misery. It's safe to say Stephen King is the master of horror. He's given us countless monsters, from supernatural clowns to haunted hotels. But for a lot of people, his scariest monster isn't a clown or a ghost. It's just a woman named Annie Wilkes. In his 1987 novel, Misery, writer Paul Sheldon crashes his car in a blizzard and is rescued by Annie, who just happens to be his #1 fan. But his rescuer quickly becomes his captor. When Annie finds out Paul has killed off her favorite character, Misery Chastain, her adoration turns to violent rage. She holds him prisoner, torturing him until he agrees to write a new book and bring Misery back to life. Now, this story is a little different. The inspiration for Misery wasn't some historical event or a true crime story. It came from something far more personal. It came from Stephen King himself. The novel is a giant allegory, and Annie Wilkes represents two different demons that were holding King captive at the time. The first demon? His own fans. In 1984, King published The Eyes of the Dragon, a fantasy novel, which was a big departure from his usual horror. Some of his fans were not happy. They felt betrayed. They wanted horror, and they let him know it. King poured that feeling of being creatively chained to one genre right into his character, Paul Sheldon. Paul feels trapped by his popular Misery novels, and Annie is the embodiment of the fans who refuse to let him grow as an artist. But Annie represented another, even more powerful demon in King's life, his own addiction. He's been very open about his struggles with drugs and alcohol, especially his heavy cocaine use in the late 70s and 80s, right when he wrote Misery. In his own words, Annie Wilkes is cocaine. She was his #1 fan. She was the thing that propped him up and made him feel powerful, and then she turned on him, refusing to let him go. So that experience of being a prisoner in Annie's house, isolated, in pain, and completely at the mercy of a powerful, destructive force, was a direct metaphor for his own battle with addiction. Paul Sheldon's desperate fight to escape from Annie was King's fight to get sober. The idea famously came to King on a dream on a flight, and he scribbled it on a cocktail napkin. It grew into one of his most personal works, because while the events are fictional, the feeling of being trapped, controlled, and tormented was all too real for its author. Conclusion. So, it turns out the line between fiction and reality is a lot blurrier than we think. Writers don't just pull these ideas out of thin air. They absorb the world around them, using history, headlines, and their deepest fears to create the stories that grab us and don't let go. The panic of the 1916 shark attacks became the monster in Jaws. The quiet depravity of Ed Gein became the chilling Norman Bates. The nightmare of the Fritzl family gave us the emotional heart of Room. And Stephen King's own demons became the terrifying Annie Wilkes. These authors took real-world horror and pain and spun it into art that explores the darkest parts of who we are. Their work is a chilling reminder that the scariest monsters aren't always fictional. Sometimes they're very, very real. So the next time you pick up a book, you might find yourself wondering, what real story is hiding between the lines?
What are your favorite stories of authors being inspired by real life? Are there any we missed? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the secrets behind the world's most famous stories. Thanks for watching.